I've mentioned already a couple times you wrote a phenomenal book called Kilo that we're going to get into here in a minute. But to start with, I wanted you to bring us up to speed on the first round of the Colombian presidential elections. Just give everybody the sort of primer of who are the characters, what happened, and what do you expect to happen next?
So to kind of set the stage, Colombia's gone through this really kind of radical times in the last kind of years. There's this desire for change in the country. We saw huge demonstrations on the streets that would sometimes turn fatal with the police killing many of the protesters. But it was this cry from so much of the country, a need to change. So we were heading into this election in 2022, really with that being the slogan of everybody. Things have to change in Colombia. The crime is too high, political power is too concentrated in too few hands. The economy is not doing as well as it should do. More of the richness of the country needs to be shared. That's kind of the slogan going into the election. So everybody thinks this is the election of this left-wing candidate, Gustavo Petro. So he's run for president before. He's a former guerrilla. He demobilized. He came out of a guerrilla group called M19. It was seen as a more of a kind of intellectual guerrilla group rather more than a bloodthirsty guerrilla group. He becomes a senator, really becomes a very extraordinarily impressive senator. He becomes mayor of Bogota between 2012, 2015, but he's seen as a far left candidate. He's the one, as we go into this election, everybody's thinking, is he going to win in the first round of voting, i.e., will he get more than 50% plus one vote? Or if he does go to the second round, which would see the final two candidates, will he then win? Everybody is kind of assuming he is going to win. So we have this candidate, we have this campaign, and seemingly out of nowhere, this candidate called Rodolfo Hernandez, the engineer, as he likes to call himself, this extraordinarily wealthy businessman who had served as a mayor in an eastern city of Bucaramanga of Colombia. He surges in the polls. So he is kind of seen as an unconventional political figure. He doesn't belong to any political party. He keeps on talking about how independent he is, how he's his own man. And so the final vote comes out that Gustavo Petro wins 40% of the vote. Hernandez wins 28%. That means those two figures are going into the next round. Now, as you see those two votes, you think, well, Petro wins 40%. He by far won more votes than anyone else in the first round. The problem people think with Petro is that is his ceiling. Essentially, everybody else in the second round is now going to unify around this figure of Hernandez. So the next vote is going to be in around June the 19th. And now the betting seems to be that it is going to be Hernandez who is going to win the election.
Let me ask you, because I see the person who came in third is Federico Gutierrez, and he got about 22% of the vote. What are his politics? Does he represent like the old neoliberal centrist guard, or what?
No, so this was, and it's kind of interesting, just a little bit of context. For the past 20 years, the dominant political force in Colombian politics has been Uribismo. That is this, some would say almost a cult of politics around the figure of the former president, Alvaro Uribe. That was the candidate of the previous government from 2018, sorry, the existing government, 2018 to 2022. That's Ivan Duque, the president. He comes out of that movement of Uribismo. Now, the desire for change is so much that Federico Gutierrez was clearly the candidate of Uribismo, but he kind of denied it because at this point, that brand of politics is seen as so tarnished. He didn't want to be the figure representing Uribismo, but clearly he was identified as the right-wing candidate in this. And I think what was happening was, and this is why Petro miscalculated, I think Petro was ready to fight a candidate he could say, you represent the establishment, you represent Uribismo, you represent a continuation of this government, which has been a black hole of just a complete 4 years wasted. It's just lost 4 years for Colombia. Petro was ready for that in the second round. What he wasn't ready for was this candidate, Hernandez, to come out of nowhere and to be to be himself claiming change. And I mean, just to give you an idea of how quickly this candidate came out of nowhere, Hernandez's vice presidential candidate, when I checked a few days ago, she had something like 2,500 followers on Twitter. This campaign has just rocketed from nowhere to become the sensation of Colombian politics. But Federico Gutierrez, really, his poor showing, he was expected to come in second place. His poor showing really shows how damaged as a brand that brand of right-wing politics are in 2022 Colombia.
Can you go into more depth on that? What is it that people found just totally want to reject about that brand of politics?
Well, again, it has been the dominant force. I mean, I would say of the past 5 elections since the appearance of Álvaro Uribe himself as a presidential candidate in 2002, Uribismo has won 4 of the 5 elections. So it's been this dominant force. And really, if you are complaining about Colombia today, if you are demanding change in Colombia today, essentially you are demanding a change from the policies that have been implemented by this 2 decades of power, almost 2 decades, 15 years of ruling this country. It's seen that security has completely fallen apart in the countryside. Remember, we had this impressive peace deal signed in 2016 between the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as the FARC. And there was this window of optimism in Colombia that year and the following year. But because of the government of Ivan Duque coming in, they always rejected that peace process. They've come in and we've seen the security, which was supposed to be a new chapter, a new history of the countryside where the civil war had been fought the hardest. Well, all of the security has deteriorated. Now we have so many individual guerrilla groups dotted across the country. In terms of the economy is not doing as well as it should be. But it gets to that point of where a political movement is just exhausted. The movement itself was so exhausted, they couldn't even come up with their own candidate. They looked around and they looked at one candidate from within the movement, they looked at another, and they just knew it wasn't going to really cut it with the voters. And the final thing, we've seen these massive protests by young people on the streets of Colombia in recent years. And I think that had kind of pushed the window of where left-wing politics were in that country. When you are demanding change, you can't be representing Uribismo. Uribismo is more of the same. And I think Colombians just want a change. And a final thing, I think, which was the miscalculation, perhaps, in terms of when we do an autopsy of what may have gone wrong with the campaign of Gustavo Petro, was that being overly confident about how many young people were going to come out to vote for him. His support among the young people is overwhelming, but on election day, I would be curious to see those figures, how many actually made it to the voting booth.
So let me ask you this, just to contextualize this for people. Would you say, is it fair to compare Rodolfo Hernandez to like a Bolsonaro figure or a Trump-like figure? And is it also fair to compare Petro to Jeremy Corbyn or Bernie Sanders?
Those are interesting comparisons, especially the Petro one. Let's start with Hernandez. I think Hernandez, there are many similarities and there are differences as well. And, I hate to sound like I'm hedging a little bit, but that's just the truth. Hernandez does come out of this idea of, I am not the politician. I don't owe anybody anything. I am independently wealthy. So he pulled something that we saw Trump do, by the way, which was when he was mayor of Bucaramanga. He said, I won't take a salary. I don't need it. I'm already wealthy. I'm going to give the money back. So there's these little gestures. But on the other hand, he's not seeking to antagonize the press in this overly aggressive campaign that we see from someone like Bolsonaro or Trump. He's not looking to be outrageous, I think, in a way that Trump constantly needed that, something that what's Trump going to do next? The media and voters just couldn't stop looking. What's he going to do? Hernandez isn't looking so much for that. Since he's won the first round, he's actually he's tried to come across as quite moderate. He's trying to be quite conciliatory. But there is that aspect of, because I'm a non-politician, I don't owe any political party any favors. So he almost likes to show himself as perhaps being a political, jackdaw or magpie, that I can take the best from the left, I can take the best from the right. And so he can come across as quite an attractive candidate. oh, he's sensible. He's rejecting these false divisions of left or right. But the question is, how is he going to pass that legislation if he becomes president? Well, the battle lines are already being drawn in Colombian politics. The left is on one side. All of the right has already rallied around him. So when it comes to any legislation, he is going to be focused on appeasing the right to get his legislation through. So he's mentioned some interesting things, going back to that thing about kind of selecting a policy from the left, from the right. He told the US ambassador in Bogota, which is this incredibly important figure in Colombia, given Colombia prides itself on being the United States' greatest ally in South America. It's kind of likes to see itself as a bridge between the US and the rest of South America. But also Colombia has received billions of dollars in anti-narcotics aid to fight the war on drugs. But Rodolfo Hernandez went to see the US ambassador, and he said to him, I would like to end the drug war. Okay, I mean, that's interesting. It's rare. Do you hear it from a leading figure of Colombian politics, although Gustavo Petro would also like to do that. Another thing that Hernandez has said, he would like to see the full implementation of that 2016 peace deal with the far left rebels of the FARC. The current government has dragged its feet on that. But again, it comes down to, if he's trying to legislate, will the right wing let him end the war on drugs? No. Will the right wing allow him to fully implement a peace deal that they detest with every cell of their DNA? No. So I think there is this kind of thing of Hernandez being this non-politician. I think that does tap into a Trump Bolsonaro, but I think he is going to have to end up running very closely to the right wing. Now, again, he denies this. He says, he just recently said in an interview, I don't need Congress to get my legislation through. Well, you do. I mean, that's not debatable. It's not a conversation. You do need Congress to get. So I think there is this kind of thing, and he's kind of seen to be not very knowledgeable about certain things. He didn't know where a province of Colombia was, and it's actually quite close to him. Bichada. And then to show you how Colombian politics are in 2022, he ends up winning that province more than anyone. He gets the outstanding votes in that province.
This is the most Trumpian shit I've ever heard in my life. Yeah. Didn't he make some Kansas City he thought it was in Kansas?
Well, I don't remember,
right?
But that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Well, so I also read something, Toby, about he had floated the idea of sort of like suspending, like almost like instituting martial law to thoroughly implement his anti-corruption agenda, and at the same time, while he's saying, basically we need to jail all the corrupt politicians, something which I'm sure is popular here, probably popular there as well. He also is himself under investigation for potential corruption. Can you speak to a couple of those things?
Exactly. So, I mean, corruption in Colombia is, some people say it's the root of everything. Everything that has gone wrong in that country, corruption is felt every single day. It angers so many Colombians. It's felt to be the cause of all of its problems. Everybody wants to be the one carrying the flag and running on the front of that war against corruption. And that's been a central tenet of his campaign. And in fact, it became a way of him avoiding really getting in to having to learn about policies. Whenever he was asked about anything, he would be asked about schooling or education. He would say, well, the problem has been corruption. We're going to investigate all of these corrupt contracts about how the school food is organized, who it's bought from. What would you do about, shake up of the civil servants? Well, this is about corruption. And it was just this way of dodging any question. So yes, I think that really has chimed with Colombian voters. They despise corruption. And yes, he is facing these investigations into his conduct. Now, he says he's not under investigation for corruption, and he says there is no evidence. Now, Colombian media reporting says that he is under investigation for corruption and that there is evidence. And it seems to involve a contract for trash removal in the city he comes from, Bucaramanga. But at the moment, doesn't seem to be sticking with him. I think many Colombians are engaged by this man who seems to be kind of speaking. It just seems to be a frank speaker. And I think, so you have these kind of two ways of looking at how Colombia is constructed at the moment and this desire for change. You have There are many things to criticize about Gustavo Petro, but he has this idea of change and speaking to the poor about, I am going to implement these policies to reduce poverty, to redistribute some of the richness of Colombia. This is my gesture towards change. This is my hearing you that you want change in Colombia. Another way of approaching, taking that anger is to say, hey, I'm with you, as Hernandez is doing. Guys in the town, I'm with you, you and me against the elites. He says he's going to work for the poor, but again, the actual policies he's providing, that he's offering up, don't really seem to be offering up that much of a change. And all of the establishment has already rallied around Hernandez. So his claims of being the candidate of change, I mean, it's, we'll see.
If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.